Okay, thanks a lot for having me here at PDA. I work for the Chicago Workers Collaborative, which is an association of temporary staffing workers. It's not a union, it's a community-based organization. We have about 400 members who pay $5 a month dues, and they work in the different staffing agencies throughout the Chicago region. There are about 300,000 staffing workers, low-wage, low-skill staffing workers in the Chicago region, primarily immigrants and ex-convicts are the primary people who work in the staffing agencies. You might know that in the Chicago region we have two very important zones of work for the low-wage market. One is the logistics hub in the Joliet, Bolingbrook area, which is one of the largest warehouse, shipping and receiving areas in the United States. It's the largest in the Midwest. Most of the goods that come in and out through the Midwest go through the Joliet area. They also go through some of the other logistics hubs in Elk Grove Village and others in the region. The other big hub here that people should know about is Elk Grove Village itself. It's the largest industrial park in the United States. There are over 1,600 light industrial warehouse types of facilities in Elk Grove Village. And in addition to that, every suburb, almost every suburb in the entire Chicago region has an industrial park with light industrial, warehouse, these types of facilities. The labor force that moves in these facilities is the temp labor force, and it's the largest labor sector in the state of Illinois. It is the second largest is the restaurant, which is around 150,000, but temp labor in Chicago region is 300,000. We're talking about 150 companies, everything from Kelly Services, Manpower to Elite Staffing, mom and pop shops. 700 branch offices. And now I'm talking the state of Illinois, 700 branch offices. Chicago has about 70 branch offices in the city. In the suburbs, there are approximately 370 branch offices in the suburbs, which is where most of the immigrant population now resides, is in the suburbs. The reason for the temp industry is, I'll give you a brief understanding of how it operates. A regular company has certain costs. They have to pay FICA, which is Medicare and Social Security tax. They have to pay unemployment compensation insurance. They have to pay workers' compensation insurance. In Illinois, it's mandatory that you have worker comp if you're an employer. You may have a union, which has a certain cost in terms of increased wages and benefits. And oftentimes, companies that are traditionally where you find temp labor now used to offer vacations, sick days, holidays, pension plans, 401k, and even medical insurance. Companies also have payroll costs, and there's a cost to hiring and firing and maintaining a workforce, a human resources department, in addition to supervision of those workers. Also, companies have a responsibility to fill out I-9 forms. I-9 forms are the forms that people have to fill out to show that they're authorized to work in the United States. What a temp agency does is it moves all that responsibility away from the company and onto the temp agency. So, for example, the costs that I just laid out for you are in the range of 30 to 35% of overall payroll. When a temp agency comes in, they take over that, and then they charge. What they earn is a percentage above that. Okay, and what this does for the company as well is it leads to it leads to a decrease in standards in terms of the actual safety that they invest in inside the company. So prior to the explosion of the temp staffing industry, a company would have to train a worker, say, 30 days when they came onto a job into a manufacturing plant before they would let them operate a machine on their own. Now when a temp company comes in, they throw the worker on the machine with just a little bit of training, and then they speed it up, okay, as fast as possible. And the reason why they do that is because that worker is basically seen as a disposable cup. Once that worker is hurt, that worker is thrown out and they're replaced with another worker. The workers, most of them are undocumented immigrants. And the reason why they're undocumented immigrants is because if you're an undocumented immigrant, you cannot apply for unemployment comp. So if you're laid off or you lose your job, you cannot go to the Department of Employment Security to get unemployment compensation. In addition, undocumented workers are afraid of filing any kind of claim if they're hurt at work. And the reason why they're afraid of filing any kind of claim is because of intimidation and retaliation. There's no safety net if you lose your job. There's no unemployment comp. So if you hurt your back or your arm or your finger or your leg or anything else, you try to go back to work as quickly as you can because you know that if you're not able to, you're not able to get unemployment comp. And if you file a claim for worker comp, most likely you're going to get fired. Okay? And then the process of trying to get that claim is a long one where you don't receive any money over a long period of months. And you have to go back to work anyway. Okay? So that's basically how the temp staffing agency works. This industry began in Chicago, the Midwest. Cleveland, Ohio was a major place. It was mostly started by funds from corrupt unions. And what they did was they started off by getting contracts with local governments to clean stadiums, to clean public works projects that were previously unionized. The union then would get a kickback in terms of the amount of money that they would receive because they lost dues by not having their members work those jobs. And the staffing company then would get a proportion of it, as well as the politicians. So, for example, at McCormick Place in Chicago, jobs that used to pay $20, $25 an hour are now being paid minimum wage. But the conventions, the conventions in the city and others that are paying the temp company are still paying the same amount. That amount has not changed. What happens is that it's split up between all these other players. You know, the industry moves in on all kind of municipal jobs everywhere, whether it's in Las Vegas, whether it's in just about any city in the United States now. Most of the municipalities, including the city of Chicago, are doing most of their work through temp staffing agencies because of this process. So the way they keep other non-immigrant workers from going into these workplaces is through criminal and credit background checks. Criminal and credit background checks, anything that comes up, they exclude you from the job. So in this way, they're able to keep an undocumented immigrant workforce coming back and forth to these companies. The companies we're talking about are Walmart and all their chain companies, from their pizza vendors all down the line to their logistics companies. You're talking Hilton Hotels. You're talking Fresh Express, which provides most of the lettuce and chopped up vegetables for McDonald's and all the fast food places, as well as Dominic's and so on. You're talking Kraft Foods, Sara Lee Foods. Military contractors are a big user of temp labor, okay? Because military contractors jack up the price that they pay to the government, but on the other end, the people that make the T-shirts and just make the different parts for the vehicles and so on are paid minimum wage. There's a huge markup on what the military contractors are paying and they're receiving in terms of profits. Temp labor is the major weapon used by companies to destroy unions. Temp labor is what's brought in when there is a strike. When there is a lockout of workers in a contract negotiation, who comes and gets the production out? The temp laborers do. In the NBA, they didn't have any temp laborers, so they couldn't do that. But in most companies, they can use temp laborers. Temp labor is not a protected workforce under the National Labor Relations Act. That's why our organization is a community organization. It's not a union. Because there's decisions that have been made that temp workers cannot be an organized union because of a theory that you're hired today and fired tomorrow. And this leads to a discussion about the medical. Employers, they have more than 50 employees, full-time employees. And then there's a calculation as to whether you have 50 employees. As of 2014, we'll have to provide health care for their employees, okay? But the temp staffing industry has a huge advantage here. I had one guy who buys stock told me, if I was going to spend my money in a ruthless way, I would invest in temp companies, okay? Because in 2014, what's going to happen is the following. Remember, in order to have to pay a penalty for not having your employees covered by health insurance, the employee has to be a member of a insurance exchange. If you're not a member of, if you are a member of an exchange, if one of your employees is a member of an insurance exchange and you're an employer with 50 or more employees, you have to pay a fine of $3,000 over the course of a year. Okay? And that fine is paid on a monthly basis. But what's interesting about the law is that undocumented immigrants and other non-citizens are not eligible for the health exchanges. So they cannot invoke that requirement, and this gives another incentive for a company to say, what do I do? Hire an employee or bring them into a temp staffing agency. Temp staffing agency is not going to pass on a health care cost to me because it's an undocumented immigrant that they're bringing in. Therefore, you're able to get around the health care law by using a temp staffing agency. The other way that they're going to do it is just for regular hires. Okay? On a regular hire, I can decide, do I want this person, even if they're a U.S. citizen, to work for me? And then that would increase the number of full-time employees I have up to 50. Okay? No. Maybe I want them to come through a temp staffing agency and not directly through my company. This is something nobody thinks about when they're writing laws. It's really common that we have to go to Springfield all the time to fix up like laws that don't take into account the effects on the temp industry. For example, in the minimum wage law that was passed 5 years ago, the increase, the negotiation was that for workers that were on a probationary period for 90 days, they would get a wage penalty of 50 cents less an hour. Then on the 91st day, they would then be bumped up to minimum wage. And so when the law was passed and we found out about that negotiation, we were like, oh my God, this means that the temp agencies will go to every single company and say, hire us because on day 89, okay, we'll fire that person and give you a new one, right? And so we had to pass a trailer bill to make that an exception in the law. The same thing is true with this law. With this law, there needs to be administrative rules enacted to talk about how temp agencies cannot be, to include them in the various provisions of this law. I'm not an expert on this law, okay? But it's something to think about. I called people in Massachusetts today. I got your email because in Massachusetts they have a similar health care program to talk to the staffing organizers over there to ask them, has that health care law in Massachusetts led to an explosion of the temp agencies? And they said, you know what, the temp agencies have been explosive here. They've been like, we're trying to pass our own law here about temp labor, but we never thought that might have been one of the reasons. The other part of our work is something called Community Labor Alliance. And what we do there is we work with labor unions, traditional labor unions, where there's lockouts. We go after the staffing companies that are responsible for bringing in the replacements in the lockout. Also, when there's strikes, we go after the staffing company, not the workers, but against the company itself. When you shine a light on any one of these companies, it's like cockroaches when you turn on your light in the kitchen, okay? Because we're a small organization. Any place where we're going to put our attention, we're going to find something. If you look at NAFTA, right? What NAFTA did was it displaced huge numbers of workers in Mexico. You're all familiar with the story about the importation after NAFTA of American corn, agricultural products, livestock, you name it. This basically drove the small Mexican farmers out of business. It displaced about 6 million farm workers, farm-owning people in Mexico from 1994 to the present. Where have those people gone? Many of those people have come here to find work. And they're without land and they're without sustenance in their own country at this point, right? So the trade deals push immigration, right? And on this side of the equation, you have companies that are willing to hire these workers, right? And to exploit them at the lowest possible cost. So that's one way, and immigration is a big part of the difference between the sending nations in the third world and in the southern countries to those here in the developed world. The second thing is the impact on labor. Okay, organized labor in the United States is a dying movement. It's a movement which is losing members every single day. Companies are switching over, getting rid of their unionized members, and replacing them with temp workers, or they're moving out of the country. Okay, so what's happened is that labor has lost power in this country to an extent that going back to the turn of the century. So who is the opposition to capital now? If labor loses power, who's going to oppose capital? In European countries, you have a fight, an almost equal fight oftentimes between labor and capital. In the United States, that's a losing battle, right? So the whole G8 issue, okay, on our end is how do we organize labor again to be a force to fight against capital and to give workers the 99%, which is the brand now, against the 1% to have a voice. A lot, our sense of this, a lot of our workers did not participate in the 99% marches. They don't understand it, okay? I would say, we had 1 million people on the street in 2006 on May 1st. All of our members were on the street. Many of them shut down their factories, okay, that day, and they were on the street. But in this other movement here, the movement, and that's why I'm here tonight, right, is there's not much connection between what goes on in the progressive movement or in the Occupy movement and what goes on in temp staffing agencies or in organizations that are super run by poor people of color. And so that's really a challenge for us. How do we come together? Because I think we have a lot in common. We don't have the same education level. We don't speak the same language, but it's people that are working super hard every single day.
Okay, thank you.